Terry Moran is out at ABC News. The veteran journalist quickly finding out the repercussions of criticizing President Trump and top White House aide Stephen Miller. A spokesperson for the network making it clear it was all about the social media rant, telling The Hill Tuesday, quote, "We are at the end of our agreement with Terry Moran based on his recent post, which was a clear violation of ABC News policies. We made the decision not to renew."
The words that got Moran fired in a now deleted post on X included this: "Miller is a man who is richly endowed with the capacity for hatred. He's a world-class hater." Moran went on to attack the president, saying in part, "Trump is a world-class hater. But his hatred is only a means to an end, and that end is his own glorification."
Now, his ouster is cause for celebration on X. Conservative firebrand Charlie Kirk weighing in, posting in part, "Terry Moran is a clear example of the radical media bias Americans have suffered for decades." White House Director of Communications Stephen Chung chiming in as well with the short message of "talk blank, get hit." And Fox News host Howard Kurtz saying in part, "Terry Moran revealed his own hatred and bile towards them, making his firing inevitable. ABC did the only thing it could do in dumping him, given the damage to the network's credibility."
The firing comes just 6 weeks after Moran interviewed Trump, where he pressed the president over Kilmar Abrego Garcia. That irritated Trump and made the now viral moment when the president suggested to Moran, "I've never heard of you," and that he was given a big break with the sit-down interview. Well, I'm not going to defend the now infamous deleted tweet. I mean, that seems self-evidently indefensible. I think that ABC News did the right thing by letting him go. I was sad about the whole episode because I think Terry Moran has been a very good journalist over the years, and I think that obviously sort of besmirched his own reputation. I actually think, I know we often criticize the mainstream media here, I think ABC News is a very good organisation to the extent that I ever watch evening newscasts. I watch the David Muir one on ABC, which I think is the best of the three major networks. And I think that part of to be clear about the actual tweet that got Moran fired, let go, or whatever term you want to use, it's not the fact that someone criticises Stephen Miller. People like myself, who are in a more opinion-y kind of role, can criticise Stephen Miller if we wish. People in all sorts of other roles can criticise Stephen Miller or anyone else. The point is that Terry Moran is not in an opinion role. He is ostensibly a straight reporter, so it completely undercuts that idea. And then, even if you were more opinion-y, some of the personalised nature, we read some of what he said about Miller, but the part that I found most indefensible was this thing. You can see this just by looking at him, looking at Stephen Miller. You see his hatreds are his spiritual nourishment.
Yeah, he eats hate, I think
he
said.
Hate. Like, that sort of, I mean, first of all, I just think about saying it about anyone, you can tell what this person's personality by looking at them is just a dumb thing to say, but it was very, very personalized.
Yeah, it was a very nasty tweet. There was nothing useful from it. It was not a critique of his policy or the things he's doing as a member of the administration, but was very, very personal, and there was no reason for it. And it seemed like maybe a mask-off moment for Terry Moran. ABC definitely did the right thing. I have a theory, and tell me what you think about this. So in the statement, ABC was very careful to say that they were at the end of a contract with Terry Moran, and so they decided not to renew the contract. I kind of wonder, maybe the negotiations weren't going super well, and Terry Moran already knew that he was on the way out, and he decided, all right, I'm going to go out with a bang. I'm going to tell you what I really think about Stephen Miller, and ABC's going to do what they will, but I'm probably not going to be around anyway.
So I, like you, was very struck with this idea that he was right at the end of his contract.
It seemed like convenient timing, right?
Right. So I mean, somewhere I read that his contract expires on Friday. That, given that he's been with ABC for 28 years, to send that tweet approximately a week before your contract is up, that seems curious timing, to say the very least. Now, I don't know what is in his head, or obviously I can't mind read him, but it is curious that timing is what it is.
Yeah, I agree. And then shortly after getting that Trump interview too, like, you would normally think that someone who has this big White House sit down is, of course, going to be renewed. He's been with the network forever, and yet he decides to go out in this sort of spectacular fashion. The whole situation is very, very strange. And I do appreciate, though, that in the statement, ABC directly called out the social media post, because a lot of times when these media firings happen, it's a very sort of cushy PR statement of, you know, we loved working with Terry, and
we wish him all the best.
We wish him well. We wish him well, but you know, our time together is up. But no, they specifically said this post was a clear violation of ABC News policies, and of course had previously suspended him on Sunday after the tweet went out. So I appreciate that they were willing to call it for what it was and not try to sort of paper over or whitewash what his conduct was.
No, and I have talked on here before about instances where I think media organizations, or specifically their corporate owners, have kind of bended the knee to Trump in a way that I thought was unjustified. That's not what I think here. I don't see any way that ABC could have justified that tweet or made light of it. They had to do what they did. The contract timing is certainly curious. Obviously, from my perspective, none of this is to defend Stephen Miller, who I think often tweets in extremely hyperbolic fashion. I mean, he's constantly referring to judicial coups anytime judges rule against the Trump administration. He has referred a number of times to communist judges, which is a charge that I find absurd. So my point is really there are lots of legitimate grounds in which one can differ with or disagree with Stephen Miller. But if you're a purportedly straight news reporter on a major news network, and remember, the whole branding of those major news networks is that they are impartial. You can't be tweeting those sort of things and expecting to keep your job.
Well, I think Terry Moran perhaps will maybe take the role of a lot of other recently departed mainstream news anchors, where they're starting their own Substacks or starting their own shows. Maybe he wanted to go independent.
Well, if that's the case, right? It is a publicity raising,
maybe
profile raising.
He's going to get a lot of Substack subscribers if he starts it now from all of his old fans at ABC News.
He is. Maybe this is the time that he should really move into that area.
Yeah, he can pull a Jen Rubin. Why not?
A single nuclear weapon today could kill millions in just minutes. Just one of these nuclear bombs would vaporize everything at its core: people, buildings, life itself.
That was Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard, remembering the horrors caused in Hiroshima and Nagasaki and warning the world of a potential nuclear war.
In a video posted on social media, Gabbard slams political elites and warmongers for bringing the world closer to the brink of nuclear annihilation. Let's take a look.
Because as we stand here today, closer to the brink of nuclear annihilation than ever before, political elite and warmongers are carelessly fomenting fear and tensions between nuclear powers. Perhaps it's because they are confident that they will have access to nuclear shelters for themselves and for their families that regular people won't have access to.
People on both sides of the aisle pushed back on Gabbard's video. Josh Hammer, host of The Josh Hammer Show, wrote on X, "The United States should never ever apologize for President Truman's correct decision to bomb Hiroshima and Nagasaki to finally end the war in the Pacific." Jesse Kelly, host of The Jesse Kelly Show, wrote on X, "3 things. 1, I agree with dropping the bombs. 2, not agreeing with dropping bombs on civilians is a perfectly reasonable take. Many felt the same way at the time. World War II isn't a religion. 3, she's talking about preventing a future nuclear war and the cost of it."
The editor-in-chief of the left-wing Midas Touch, Jan Filipkowski, also chimed in. DNI Tulsi Gabbard repeats Putin's talking points today, releasing an unhinged video where she claims that political elites want a nuclear war with Russia because they have sophisticated bomb shelters that will help them survive it. Where to begin with this, Amber?
It's interesting. Pushback from both sides, as we mentioned. Look, I think it's possible to understand the U.S.'s decision-making in dropping the nuclear bomb and trying to end the war and perhaps prevent significant American casualties, and also recognize that it is still a very dark day in world history, that it had massive civilian casualties, And I think if she would have ended the video by saying, and that's why we can never let Iran have a nuclear weapon, maybe it would have been received better. But I just don't find these two views mutually exclusive.
Well, so first of all, I agree with you about her foregrounding Hiroshima and Nagasaki. I think it is, yes, I understand the arguments, which was that even with the massive death toll from those, the dropping of the atomic bombs, that there would have been a greater death toll had you had to fight on with a land war in the Pacific. But I do think that the crossing of the atomic bomb Rubicon in that respect, and the killing of an estimated 210,000 people at the time, and all the people who have died from radiation exposure since, I think that was, you used the word bleak day or dark day, and I think that's right. So credit to her for saying that. Now, it's interesting whether you interpret it as being about Iran. I interpreted it as, I think some people on the left are doing, as being about Russia and Ukraine, because obviously Tulsi Gabbard is very well known for being, let me try to put this neutrally, very skeptical of support for Ukraine, and I think that she therefore gets criticism for being overly sympathetic to Russia. And so when she starts talking about elites and their nuclear shelters and people plotting essentially to bring the world to the brink or into a nuclear war, I took her to mean people who are vigorous supporters of Ukraine.
I also read it, though, in relation to Iran, because we also have people who have been quite reticent for the Trump administration to negotiate directly with Iran, to leave Israel out of some of those discussions, to try to spur the U.S. to side with Israel in an attack on Iran, which we talked about last week with the Mark Levin debate. He wasn't happy about what we said on the show.
Wasn't happy with you.
No, he
mind liberal criticism, but he wasn't happy with you.
No, he wasn't thrilled, but that's okay. I don't mind. But yeah, I think it's probably about both things. I think it's generally about this sort of split in the Republican Party and even in the Democrats, right, where you have these sort of non-interventionist wings of both parties, and then you have the neocons and neoliberals in the middle who have been, over the past 20 years, very happy to get themselves into forever wars that don't have a seeming goal at the end, because there's always the underlying protection of, well, the U.S. is the greatest nuclear power in the world. And so I think she's hinting at some of those tensions among the American elites in their decision to send people to war, to want to spur on conflict, as opposed to just like Putin propaganda.
Yeah, I mean, I think that one of the difficulties with the video is that what specifically she means is open to interpretation.
It's a little vague.
Yeah, I mean, she, of course, expresses regret or sadness about what happened with the dropping of the atomic bombs, but beyond that, is she having a go at the John Bolton type figures who are your classic neocons and let's bomb everywhere, or is she having a go at the people who are supportive of Ukraine? One of the things that frustrates me, if it's the Ukraine side of it, is that I don't think the anti-interventionist side in that respect really grapples fully with the consequences of Russia winning, of a Russia invasion of another sovereign country prevailing. And so I think that there is sometimes just a sort of willful ignoring of the consequences of that. Yes, you can make the arguments that she makes about NATO expansionism and all of those things, but like there is the bottom line question about, do we just allow Russia to invade neighboring countries and do nothing about it?
Yeah, and I think, to be fair, the Trump administration has made pretty clear that they want some kind of negotiation, ultimate peace agreement between Ukraine and Russia. But they also don't want Russia to just like run roughshod over the whole process. And Trump had that tweet recently where he talked about his phone call with Putin, where he felt like he was not living up to his end of the deal, that they weren't really anywhere closer to reaching a peace agreement because Putin was being so obstinate. So actually, I think his posture on this has been pretty spot on.
Fair enough. We'll agree to mildly disagree.
More than 1,000 nationwide protests are set to take place this weekend, but these won't be targeting ICE raids. Instead, the Trump administration and its plan to hold a massive military parade in the nation's capital to celebrate the Army's 250th birthday.
Since the announcement that more than 6,000 soldiers will descend on DC with tanks, helicopter flyovers and military vehicles, critics have been quick to highlight the June 14th date, which just so happens to fall on President Trump's 79th birthday.
Progressive group Indivisible, a group of former congressional staffers, is helping organize the nationwide protest dubbed No Kings, posting on Blue Sky, "We will not cower even in the face of Trump's militarized escalation. On Saturday, we are going to rise up across the country in defiance of this administration's authoritarian agenda." The group says nearly 2,000 events are planned nationwide and will be the single largest protest of the Trump administration. But it's missing one notable location, Washington, D.C. But Trump doesn't seem to want to take any chances on the massive celebration being disrupted, saying this Tuesday during a press conference in the Oval Office.
And we're going to be celebrating big on Saturday. We're going to have a lot of, and if there's any protester who wants to come out, they will be met with very big force. By the way, for those people that want to protest, they're going to be met with very big force. And I haven't even heard about a protest, but, you know, this is people that hate our country.
With an estimated cost between $25 million and $45 million, many question why the administration would put this event on, especially after Trump unleashed Elon Musk and Doge on the federal government. The Southern Poverty Law Center even put out a list of 5 things the money could pay for, such as 14 million lunches for high schoolers, funding Medicaid coverage for almost 6,000 eligible people for the year, or even covering a year of disability compensation for more than 7,000 military veterans. I imagine this is one we're going to have very different views on. I went first when we were talking about Bob Costas, so why don't you lead us off here with what you
Sure, will do. Well, I'm very excited about the parade. I think it's going to be awesome. Look, I know there's been a lot of talk about, oh, this is Trump demonstrating his authoritarianism. This is the Army's 250th birthday. It's also Flag Day. June 14th, 1775, the U.S. Congress established the U.S. Army, and I think it's definitely worth celebrating. This is also a massive advertisement at a time when they're trying to turn around military recruitment numbers, and it's also a great exercise of American strength when we have so many conflicts on the global stage. And this is not the first time we've had a military parade in the United States. There was one in 1991 following the conclusion of the Gulf War. There was one in 1942 as the U.S. started its involvement in World War II, another one at the end of World War II, and then there are a lot of local parades that happen throughout all kinds of different celebrations. And you know, I remember growing up in a small town, these times where we got to see our veterans walking through the streets was a time of great excitement and great patriotism. And I think we could use more of that in America. Sure.
I think that this event that is forthcoming here on Saturday is one of those that is seen through a completely different lens, depending on basically whether one is of a more conservative or more liberal viewpoint. And you just outlined the conservative view very well. For people who have misgivings about it, or more than misgivings, the problem, I think, is this coincidence of the 250th anniversary with Trump's birthday. He will obviously be there, as it were, reviewing the troops, and this comes against a backdrop of the deployment of the National Guard in Los Angeles, the deployment of US Marines in Los Angeles. The fear, I think, among liberals is that this is a display of sort of strongman power and militarism and the identification of Trump with that military power. That's why I think so many people have objections to it. Now, it is certainly true that, you know, you and many millions of other people see it differently, and me and millions of other people will remain critical of it. What I did find quite objectionable in the remarks of Trump's that we played there from the Oval Office was not so much the question about protesters. It was the definition of protesters as people who hate our country. I actually think that people who are taking part in this protest, pushing back against what they see as an excessive power grab by him, are being patriotic themselves in doing that.
I do think he should have specified riots when he talked about the response to protest, and Caroline Leavitt, the press secretary, clarified that in a question at the press briefing yesterday, saying that, of course, Trump supports peaceful protest. He's talking about people like ones in LA who are firebombing cars or throwing rocks at police officers, and that distinction needs to be made evident, that people who engage in violence are the ones who are going to face consequences, not the ones who are peacefully protesting. I've seen this No Kings group quite a bit, actually, because on my drive home from DC, there's an overpass over 395 heading south, where every single day I go home, they're standing up there with their signs, and there's a group of about 10 to 15 of them, and they have the No Kings slogan up there. So not surprised that they've been planning this massive protest for quite some time. Of course, the 250th celebration of the Army was also planned before the deployment of the National Guard to California. So although people might connect those two things, of course, it is important to point out that this was a long time in the making. And then, of course, we also have the 250th celebration on July 4th coming up, which I think a lot of people are very excited for as well. The U.S. Army has made clear that they do not intend to acknowledge Trump's birthday during this event, which I think is important and shouldn't be done. Let's keep the focus where it should be, which is on the celebration of our military and our amazing veterans.
Yeah, to clarify on the point about the National Guard, my point was that it coming in close proximity to the deployment of the National Guard and the Marines fuels the greater controversy. On the point of keeping the subject or the focus where it should be and not overly politicizing the military. That did not work, I noticed, terribly well in Fort Bragg earlier this week, where Trump was speaking in front of troops. Now, lots of presidents speak in front of troops. The problem here was that when, for example, he made negative reference to Gavin Newsom and to Karen Bass, some of the troops were clearly joining in the booing of their names. And there were a couple of other instances that can be easily enough found on social media or elsewhere of the troops obviously endorsing a very political message from him. That doesn't do anybody any favors, and it certainly drags the military down into a kind of partisan sniping, pardon the expression, that I think is just ultimately detrimental.
I would like Trump to keep those remarks when he visits these military bases more focused on supporting the military as opposed to doing the sort of political rally shtick, and I think that's a fair criticism. Getting into the price tag on this this rally or this celebration, which a lot of people have pointed to, I do think, comparing it to the DoD's larger budget is important. In 2023, they spent $1.1 billion on advertising. This is, $43 million? And it's probably the best advertisement that the Army could ever have. So I also think celebrating the 250th anniversary is worthy of that price tag. So obviously reasonable people can disagree about that, but I think it's well worth it.
I think there is never any harm in putting the price tag of things in proportion or in context of the overall expenditure. I mean, I would have a smaller budget for the Pentagon if I was emperor, but I'm not, so that's not how that goes. So I think those are fair points. It's notable, and this isn't even to make to decry what Trump is doing. I think there are other reasons to decry it, but it is notable that the Marines and the Navy, which have anniversaries around the same time, are not doing similar things of a similar scale.
Yeah,
so
that's fair.
That's different.
Burning cars, flashbangs, tear gas, blocked freeways, all of this is part of the scene at immigration protests in Los Angeles. The situation got to a point where President Trump felt the need to deploy hundreds of National Guard troops to the area.
In response, California Governor Gavin Newsom and Los Angeles Mayor Karen Bass are accusing Trump of causing chaos. Here's Newsom on MSNBC yesterday.
Donald Trump has created the conditions you see on your TV tonight. He's exacerbated the conditions. He's, lit the proverbial match. He's putting fuel on this fire ever since he announced he was taking over the National Guard.
Meanwhile, President Trump wrote on Truth Social that he was directing cabinet members Kristi Noem, Pete Hegseth, and Pam Bondi to take all action necessary to end the riots. In another post, he wrote, Governor Gavin Newsom and Mayor Bass should apologize to the people of Los Angeles for the absolutely horrible job that they have done. And this now includes the ongoing LA riots. These are not protesters. They are troublemakers and insurrectionists. Remember, no masks.
Newsom has formally asked the Trump administration to rescind what he called the unlawful deployment of troops to Los Angeles. Border Czar Tom Homan said that California officials could be arrested if they interfere or disrupt ICE raids. Here's Newsom's response.
The hell is this guy? Come after me, arrest me. Let's just get it over with. Tough guy. I don't give a damn. But but I care about my community. I care about this community. The hell are they doing?
LAPD's chief of police, Jim McDonnell, told reporters he wouldn't have requested National Guard assistance at first, but now, however, he says, quote, looking at the violence today, I think we've got to make a reassessment.
Mayor Bass issued a statement that reads, quote, it doesn't matter where you came from or how you got here. The most important thing right now is that our city be peaceful. Protest and expressing your fears, your beliefs is appropriate to do, but it's not appropriate for there to be violence.
Yes, and there is certainly a lot of violence going on. We're seeing there is looting, there is rioting, Waymos set on fire. These are the self-driving vehicles. It's really grisly images. I think this optics is just terrible for protesters who are opposed to the administration's deportation policies. I think this will make the public much, much more sympathetic to what Trump is trying to do with the deportations. If it was a trap for the protesters, man, have they fallen into it, because widespread rioting and looting is never popular. It is rightly disliked by the American people, burning down people's communities, setting things on fire, causing violence, fighting the police. None of this is a good look. It's wrong on its face, because just because the government is doing something you think is unjust doesn't give you the right to rob someone's store or burn their vehicle. You just, like, that's not even directing your anger at the right person. So I don't know why they're doing this. It's a bad idea. It should be condemned, and the police will necessarily respond to it.
And I think Karen Bass did an amazing job condemning it. She said there's nothing about what I'm saying that this, like blocking a highway, burning a car, none of that is appropriate. That's not the type of protesting that we appreciate and have always embraced here in Los Angeles. But this was all about optics. This wasn't actually about getting anything accomplished, because it's problematic to skip over Gavin Newsom, to skip over Mayor Bass and not tell them what's happening and what the plan is forward. The most troubling thing she said to me was in an interview last night. Karen Bass was like, I just don't know what's next, or what the National Guard is supposed to be doing, or what federal decisions are being made for state leaders. And just to be clear, just because you oppose National Guard or military deployment into local neighborhoods does not mean that you're pro-crime. It means that you think that state and local police can do their jobs and handle it.
It sounds like the local police
need to agitate. No, they can.
It sounds like the local police do want the National Guards to help.
Because now it's already been agitated, and then these aggressors are ruining the movement that automatically was just saying, let's just try to figure out how to do this by due process and constitutionally. And what I think that we're missing is that President Trump is sending the National Guard prior to needing it. When we look at past incidences, like in 1992, the riots, or in Hurricane Katrina, the president at the time worked closely with the mayor and governor because they requested national and federal help. They requested that. President Trump has a habit of skipping over important steps to get things accomplished the way our government works. From Congress to local mayors, you need to work with governors in order to have an appropriate response. These people have to live underneath the governor that's leading at the time. Yeah. And so President Trump skipping them not only sends a message to the world that we are uncoordinated and unorganized, but it also tells agitators, okay, I'm going to already take it here, like it needs to be treated like a foreign country, and then the worst of us come out and do things like what they did. Because I don't think the first 2 days of protesting were like anything like what we saw yesterday.
I would just say your timeline of protest there skips over what many conservatives say is the most relevant one, the Black Lives Matter riots, for which there was a desire among the people living in cities where widespread rioting and looting took place for greater police protection, including with sending in the national troops, an idea Tom Cotton expressed in the pages of the New York Times, if you remember that got the op-ed editor fired for having dared to let Tom Cotton write this opinion that if you polled most people in the country, a majority of poll respondents agreed the national troops should be brought in to stop rioting. When you talk to people in these communities, when you talk to low-income Democrats, black people in the communities, the people who actually have to live with the rioting and the looting, they say, no, please get the government more involved. We don't want that. Nobody wants this except affluent, white, liberal, progressive activists.
And a National Guard maybe then should have been called on all the January 6th insurrectionists as well, right? The ones that Trump pardoned. So we can have this conversation in circles over and over again. No, that was also inappropriate and rioting by all standards, okay?
Do you think the law enforcement response was inappropriate?
No, I think that they were rioting and that the National Guard should have been called on them also then. This
Okay,
is the same
fine.
person that makes
That's
the
fine.
decision. Trump didn't do that in that moment, and he's doing it now unnecessarily. That was way worse than this.
Well,
So
wait a
when
minute.
do
There's a
you-
dispute over how.
Yeah, I know there's a dispute,
Conservatives
but
will say
President Trump
that
pardoned
they
them.
wanted to bring in a greater police presence, and that Nancy Pelosi thwarted that, and that local Democratic leaders didn't want that. So I don't think Republicans are saying there shouldn't have been more police there for January 6th.
Well, by
I think they're saying the
pardoning
whole
them,
thing
yes,
would
you're
have
saying
never
that.
happened had they had the police response that Republicans wanted and Democrats
So
prevented.
you think we should just have military parading around our streets of America, and that's supposed to be normal? Skipping over governors and mayors for making big decisions like this and just having military presence?
Absolutely
that
not.
sounds
But
like a dictatorship.
absolutely not. But it can't be normal to set cars on fire and occupy government
Absolutely.
buildings and block highways and loot stores. The police should and will respond.
Well, that's
to that.
why we have
You're right.
local
And I
police
would
that
hope,
can handle it.
And I would hope the local police do a good enough job so that the feds are not necessary. I agree with you that it shouldn't be the first resort to send in federal troops to every kind of dispute. But I think a lot of these Democratic-controlled areas have proven that they are not capable, including, especially in California, where there's rampant crime and stores being looted all the time, and decay and homelessness and drug addiction out in the streets everywhere. I think they've demonstrated that they can't necessarily take care of the problem.
To be continued, Robbie. We'll keep talking about this.
David Hogg has been ousted as vice chair of the Democratic National Committee. He announced Wednesday he will not seek re-election for the ranking position. This came after the committee voted to vacate him from the role in a procedural dispute. Malcolm Kenyatta, who was also vice chair, was also vacated by the same means. In a statement, Hogg wrote in part, quote, "I came into this role to play a positive role in creating the change our party needs. Ultimately, I have decided to not run in this upcoming election so the party can focus on what really matters. I need to do this work with leaders we deserve, and it is going to remain my #1 mission to build the strongest party possible."
This caps months-long party infighting that the Gen Zer set off after he declared his group, Leaders We Deserve, would be shelling out $20 million to primary Democratic incumbents. The party has been furious with Hogg, to say the least. They leaned into a technicality to push him out based on DNC rules. The executive committee must be gender diverse. Pollster Nate Silver reacted, posting, quote, "This is Olympic-level DNCing. You can't DNC any harder than this." Democratic strategist Max Burns weighed in, writing, quote, "I'm really peeved with how this decision casts doubt on the legitimacy of Kenyatta's big win and turns this entire thing into a spectacle about David Hogg. If the DNC doesn't see value in building up genuine party leaders like Malcolm Kenyatta, we are in serious trouble."
I do think Malcolm Kenyatta has been rather the forgotten victim
Very
in all
true,
of this.
very true.
He's not getting a lot of publicity, and he's got caught up in this issue about how exactly he and Hogg were elected and the elections being removed. Now, I assume Kenyatta will seek the office again, which Hogg is not doing.
Yeah.
So there's that. I think you tend to get a little more exercised about David Hogg than I do. I don't mind him. I don't also think he's the guru or messiah to lead Democrats out of the wilderness. I think he has a point about fresh leadership. He's obviously on the progressive side. I think there are legitimate criticisms that he hasn't really been completely specific about what he believes, and it's this thing about like, well, Democrats are too old and dying in office in some cases, but there are also some really good people and some young people that we don't want to be associated with, and his statement went into all of that. Obviously, the DNC was not particularly thrilled at someone with that level of name recognition threatening or promising to spend money on primary challenges to incumbents. So I'm not that surprised by what has happened is my bottom line.
Yeah, exactly. I think that looking at the DNC rules, they did misapply them, and the election was not run properly. According to their gender equity rules, they're supposed to, after they run the first vice chair election, depending on who's elected, whether it's a man or a woman, the voters in the second election are then supposed to have to rank a member of the opposite sex to be their #1 choice. And then so forth with the third and fourth elections. But what they did instead is, after a woman was elected on the first ballot, on the second ballot they did a joint election of Hogg and Kenyatta, which is why he got caught up in this. So I think it was done incorrectly, but would anyone have challenged this if it weren't for the fact that David Hogg was running afoul of DNC convention? And as much as I think it is very much a DNC sort of establishment-y move, I do think, if something similar happened at the RNC and a vice chair was openly calling for primarying incumbents in safe seats in very heavily Democratic districts, I expect the same thing would probably happen.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have any great love for either of the party committees, but they exist, and they exist for the party to win elections.
Right.
So it's not surprising that they are going to be opposed to challenges to incumbent office holders, unless that person is in really egregious, disgrace at somebody who's committed a crime.
Or like a Steve King figure.
Yeah,
right.
exactly. Where it's just like, okay, this guy's really hurting the party. We have to get rid of him, essentially. But otherwise, they are always going to favour incumbents. Now, of course, that can topple over into something that happened in the presidential process in 2016, certainly, where the DNC pretty obviously and undeniably put a thumb on the scales in favour of Hillary Clinton over Bernie Sanders. But when it comes to congressional or Senate seats, I think Hogg is primarily focused on congressional seats. Like, the party committees are going to support the incumbents unless there's some very extreme reason not to.
Yeah, that's right. And I think outside of that, Hogg did have legitimate criticisms of the Democratic Party. You mentioned the age issue. There have been several Democratic congresspeople who have died in office in just the past year, and also talking about how the party needs to appeal more to young men. And so I think he actually had the right criticism of the party, but as you pointed out, it wasn't really clear what his solutions were outside of these primary challenges, and that's where he really ran into trouble.
Right, and I think that's one of the things that caused aggravation among more rank-and-file Democrats, who themselves often do have criticisms of the leadership of the party or a lack of sort of impetus or momentum right now. Hogg, in his statement, pointed out that for all that Trump has done, which obviously most Democrats loathe, the approval rating of the Democratic Party is somewhere in the high 20s. So, that's still pretty dismal. When he was sort of suggesting what might be the road forward, he focused a lot on long past achievements of the Democratic Party. I mean, he talked about things like Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security. He did, to be fair, talk about the Affordable Care Act. So by implication, he wants them, I think, to focus on large-scale domestic policy goals. But it's not all that clear, and as you say, that's where the criticism, I think, has more validity often.
Yeah, I wonder too if this will cause, not the DNC, because they voted obviously to remove Hogg, but whether people adjacent to the party apparatus will start to critique this voting rule in regards to the gender split, right?
Yeah.
Because a lot of young people and progressives in the party were quite excited about Hogg's tenure as DNC vice chair. And Kenyatta, of course, is a black man, so he represents racial diversity. Will they take a second look at this and say, okay, maybe this didn't have the intended effect, since we're pushing out people who we otherwise believe are capable or qualified to be in this role because they happen to be a white male.
Yeah, I think you made an important point earlier when you said that, yes, the election of Hogg and Kenyatta was in contravention of these bylaws, but would anyone really have seized upon it? It is that thing of focusing on what is not exactly a technicality, it's a breach of the bylaws, but I think that would have been let slide if David Hogg was fully enthused about incumbents rather than suggesting he would finance challengers.
Yeah, I suspect that's the case too. It's kind of similar with the recent attacks on John Fetterman's mental health, where there were concerns about this when he was running for election the first time, but then they were only brought up by members of his own party when he started pushing back on the popular wisdom on Israel and the border and things like that.
I would have a more negative view on Fetterman, but we'll get into that some other time.